Hello, welcome to Scott's Odyssey. With all of the fun and odd things that have taken place in Pennsylvania history, I think it's equally important that we remember the darker and more macabre parts of our history. With an opening statement such as that, I feel it's necessary to warn all of my viewers that the information that comes next is extremely dark. It's excessively macabre, it's not for the faint of heart, and will be a very sensitive subject surrounding the actions of a woman who once lived in Gallitzin, Pennsylvania. Again, I cannot stress how emotionally crushing this story is and how you need to know before you continue that it is indeed a factual, horrific story that may end up haunting you for a very long time. Now is the time for you to leave and watch one of the other videos on the channel if you are sensitive to the negative side of who we once were. You have been warned. See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage, and if you're new to Scott's Odyssey, welcome aboard. The intent of this story is to cover the documented evidence publicly available regarding a piece of our history that should not be taken lightly nor dismissed as happenstance, but recognized as a part of our humanity, whether it was for the better or for the worse. There is no malice nor ill will toward anyone spoken about in this video, and no intentions of creating harmful emotions for anyone involved or anyone who watches this video. This video is about history, not the glorification of a murder, nor enabling of any form of hybristophilia. I'm telling this story from a scientifically and socially curious aspect of who we once were and still are today. It was September the 2nd in the year 1980, and as is in the human experience, it was a very sad day for Guy Schrack, who was on his way home from laying his longtime friend, 76-year-old Stella Williamson, to rest. When he got home, he did what everyone in this situation has to do, and that is to begin to put her final affairs in order. Often as one does, this requires making the determination of what stays and what goes, what is to be sold, donated, discarded, and remembered. A very long and arduous process, to say the least. Stella Williamson was born in 1904 and lived to the age of 76 in Gallitzin, where she finally succumbed to death listed as natural causes, but more likely to her diabetes that had taken her leg just a few years earlier. Born to ODDDySEEy and Alfred Williamson with two older brothers, Arthur and Howard, she was the last of her family line. Comments from the neighbors were evenly spread, where some claimed her to be a wonderful officer at the local United Methodist Church, who worked diligently as one of the people who cleaned the floors. And when fundraising benefits would come around for the volunteer fire department, she had helped making the sandwiches. Others laid claim she was a neighborhood gossip queen, and always spoke either poorly of others or was always yearning of what others had that she did not. But it's possible, if not likely, that those speaking poorly about Stella were actually attributing the traits of her mother, ODDDySEEy, upon her. The children of the community liked Stella because she would poke fun at them as they went by while sitting on her front porch, or she would have them stop by for some baked treats while she told them stories or played games with them. Those who attended her funeral claimed to have done it out of respect for the dead more than anything else. Being that Gallitzin is like many small depressed towns in Pennsylvania, everyone knew everyone and usually knew about everyone else's business, or at least that's what many neighbors in these types of locations think when they indeed usually know nothing about their neighbors and equally condemn each other for the same gossip they spread on a daily basis. According to the locals, Stella was no different than her mother and was very much a spinster, or at least an unmarried older woman who kept to herself, rarely leaving her home. But when periods of time would come around and nobody saw Stella, the rumors of what was happening in her house would begin to fly. Guy Schrack lived across the street from Stella Williamson with his wife until 1937, when Guy became widowed. Because of the financial depression in both Guy and Stella's situation, Guy moved over to Stella's house and became a boarder. The house was already established for boarders ever since Stella's mother, DeSEEy, had been widowed and started taking in boarders when Howard, the oldest of Stella's older brothers, moved out in 1931. Whether the relationship between Guy and Stella was anything more than Guy being a boarder and friends with Stella is a matter of pure conjecture. But as friends, Guy had spent 43 years with Stella and was in the role of sorting out her affairs after she passed. As Guy was looking for a last will and testament, and going through the things you never would have thought of looking through because you would have respected the privacy of others, Guy came across a letter kept in a safe place that was handwritten and dated February 1960, which stated on the envelope, "To be opened after my burial." Believing he had found her will, Guy opened the letter and read, "Today I started to bleed and I want to make things right if anything should happen to me. In the attic in an old trunk you will find babies I had to Howard dress 30 years or more. How I got away with it, I don't know, but I did so, and I don't want anyone else to be blamed for something they know nothing about. This is one reason I could never marry anyone else. I have lived a good life since, so as God is my judge, this is the truth. Please forgive me if you can. Stella." The postscript read, "He never wanted me, only something to play with, and I was a fool in his hands." Guy contacted the state troopers that he needed assistance rather immediately and that it required the county coroner. It is stated that State Trooper Lawrence Molesky and Cambria County Coroner John Barron responded to the call under an assumption that this would be nothing more than an issue of a family of dead squirrels found in the building. Guy showed the letter to the man and explained how he knew nothing of the letter before now and how he came to live with Stella as a boarder back in 1937 after his wife passed, and that his only time in the attic where this letter explained a trunk was located was when he put the bust of a deer he had into the attic for storage. He even expressed that he never knew of Stella ever being pregnant during this time with her. The trunk was moved from the attic to the coroner office. When the trunk was opened, it was full of newspapers from as far back as 1923, and all the papers were hardened like paper mache. The individual rolls were taken and x-rayed, indeed showing that they contained human remains. It's believed the hardening of the paper was due to the evaporation of fluids sealing the bodies inside each roll, like mummies. At this time, the case of the trunk had become not a potential case of murder, but a case of mass murder. Because Barron was only a coroner and not a forensic investigator of mass murderers, he required the help of someone who would know how to deal with this unfolding situation in order to continue the case. This brought in Dr. William Krogman, a well-known anthropologist, and Dr. Halbert Fillinger, a respected pathologist. Dates on the newspaper were used to establish a timeline in order to determine the age of the victims. Each of the bundles were opened based on how they were placed in the trunk from top going down. The first one removed had a date on the paper of 1929. When the bundle was slowly and carefully opened, the contents fell out into a small pile of bones. Disappointingly, this would not prove well in determining any degree of relationship, meaning they would not know a parent from a child, a brother from a sister or grandchild, and so on. But being that the bones were in pristine condition, Dr. Krogman was able to determine that the age of this infant was between 3 and 6 months of age at the time of its death. The cause of death could not be determined at this time. The second bundle, dated 1927, was opened. Maggots thought to have been dead found within the bundle for 53 years sprung to life under the heat from the lights of the examination room. Remains of flesh that had become mummified showed that the infant was well fed while alive. Beetle fissures were found in the bones, and no immediate cause for death was apparent in this examination. Unlike the first two casings, The third came out of the trunk with little effort. This bundle was dated 1933. Much of this infant was intact compared to the previous two. This infant was approximately several weeks old. Dr. Fillinger noticed on the infant corpse the signs of ligature around its throat. Upon further inspection, it was found that this infant also had a posterior skull fracture. The skull fracture was not what caused the fatality, but the rope around the neck most certainly did, clearly showing that this infant was indeed murdered. The fourth bundle was dated as 1932. The X-ray revealed a lumbar lordosis, an inward S-curve of the spine showing signs that this infant had been of walking age at the time of its death. Dr. Krogman established the age of this infant to be between 9 and 12 months. The determination of death for this infant was morbidly apparent. It had been ligatured with a scarf, with the remaining ends of the scarf shoved into its mouth and down its throat. In the report, it stated that over time and with decay, it caused the child's mouth to become distorted, giving it an inhuman facial appearance. The remaining bundle was dated 1923. Dr. Krogman determined that this was most likely the first in the chain of mass murders. But this determination came into question when removing the first layer of papers to discover a paper with the date of 1925, skewing the use of dates on the paper from being valid determination of dates for death. Dr. Krogman claimed that this infant had been wrapped, unwrapped, and rewrapped, with the theory that perhaps the perpetrator had felt remorse for their actions or was morbidly curious to what transpired post-mortem of that infant. The remains were estimated to be between 3 and 6 months of age, with no determination of a cause for the death. Armed with what information was found across the 5 infant remains, Barron was able to discover within the mix of bones of the first infant discolored ligature, giving a final determination that out of the 5 babies, 3 of them were definitively and intentionally murdered. The investigation took the information written in the letter as exceptionally circumstantial evidence to Stella's claim of who the father of the infant was. Upon further investigation of the time periods in which these babies were born, the following was uncovered. Alfred Williamson, Stella's father, died in 1930. Howard, the oldest of her older brothers, moved out in 1931. The first boarder was Bert Blackburn, who lived in the home until 1934. When Arthur, the youngest of her older brothers, moved out to marry in 1937, Guy Schreck moved in. Dessie Williamson, Stella's mother, died in 1942. Crossing these dates with the dates of the newspapers of the infants means that someone aside from Stella was living in the house during the time at which each baby was born. Not much of the information regarding most of the boarders is known, except that the first boarder, Bert Blackburn, had requested Stella's hand in marriage, of which Stella declined. Upon deeper investigations and questioning of former boarders, it was determined that the only people present during the time of Stella's birthing of these children and who have had knowledge was her father, at least up until he passed, her mother, and her brother Arthur. Theories of postpartum, potential pedos, and potential relationship control issues with the father of the babies all rolled around the table for discussion of a motive. Being left with nothing more than remains and people who had already passed left the option off the table, except for the last one, the alleged father of the babies. Coroner Barron and Trooper Molesky paid a visit to Howard Drass. When they arrived at Howard's residence, what they found complicated the investigation. Howard was now 84 years of age. He had suffered a stroke years before, leaving him paralyzed and incapable of speech. It's claimed that due to senility, he couldn't hear nor write. So instead they questioned his wife. Her responses were that she knew nothing of what they were talking about. And that was good enough for them to actually believe her. On October 10th of 1980, the Stella Williamson case was deemed a mass murder by confession of Stella in her handwritten letter with no other evidence, and then it was officially closed. Coroner Barron buried all of the infants together in a single pine box at a non-disclosed portion of a potter's field so as not to attract any grave robbers or people who were interested in the story. Howard Drass passed away 2 months after the discovery of the infants. The only comments I have on this piece of history is that although we may want to condemn based on the horrors that occurred, we have no information on why these murders happened, nor who the actual culprit of this perpetration was. I mean, based on the letter, we could say it was Stella, but that doesn't really mean anything because she was asking for forgiveness on what she felt she got away with, but never confessed to murder, never confessed to harm of the infants, just placing them in the trunk. For all we know, it was her mother or her brother Arthur. There just is not enough information to put blame on any person for the heinous acts taken upon these infants. I hope you enjoyed learning a history of who we once were out of Gallitzin, Pennsylvania, although it's one of the darker ones. Realize that this retelling a history that happened is historical fact and is something that goes against the YouTube algorithm when it comes to commercialization. Because of that, I'd like to humbly request if you'd be kind enough to help support the channel by visiting the merch store or stopping by Patreon at the end of this video, or share this video out to other people that might be interested, or go watch the other videos and leave comments there. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts on the history of Stella Williamson. And remember to keep it clean and be respectful to the channel and to other people's comments, or yours will be deleted. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.